Hi, and welcome to our lecture on the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment is a time period in the 18th and 19th century, that emphasized it was a change from what had come before. Previously, we have very strong monarchies, which are like kings and queens that are dictators. They tell everyone what they can and can't do. They have heavy taxes for poor people. There's a very strict caste system. The Enlightenment came around and it was trying to change that. It was pulling new ideas into politics. The Enlightenment had three primary ideas or concepts. The first is humanism, and that's the idea that people are important. The second is the importance of the individual rather than the group. And the third is the rediscovery of classical teaching. So this is like going back to Plato and Aristotle and Cicero. Like, these are important people. We should be looking at them. We should be teaching the classics, which is them. The English Bill of Rights is the first Enlightenment document we're going to look at. The English Bill of Rights was published in 1689 after the Glorious Revolution of 1688, which was a bloodless revolution that overthrew the monarchy in England, basically. It overthrew King James II, and they decided that they wanted to do something different. They didn't want a monarchy anymore. It wasn't working. So they created a separation of powers. That basically means that they still have a king. This is with the constitutional monarchy too. They still have a king, but the king doesn't really do anything. Instead, they have a parliament like Congress, and prime minister, and a prime minister, which is like the president, and things like that. A monarch has some abilities, but not very many. It can make rules only with the consent of Parliament and the consent of the people through Parliament. The whole point of this document was to protect the rights and the liberties of the individual. So you can see how we're sort of pulling in that idea of humanism, how people are important, as well as the importance of the individual. So people can petition Parliament without fear of retribution, so they can say, hey man, I really don't like what's going on here. Can we change it? And instead of being beheaded because they said that they didn't like something, they'll take that into consideration. Second, they cut the army. During peacetime, there's to be no standing army. Third, it gives the right to bear arms. This is done because Protestants previously could not bear arms, but Catholics could. So that's problematic. So they wanted everybody to be able to bear arms. And fourth, that there shouldn't be any excessive bail or cruel and unusual punishments. These things were taken and put into our Constitution later. And you can see that in our Bill of Rights as well. So let's move into talking about a couple of thinkers of the Enlightenment. This first early one is Thomas Hobbes. So Hobbes started by asking, why do we have governments? After thinking about it a long time, as philosophers do, he came to the conclusion that we have governments to keep people out of the state of nature. So the state of nature is humanity without government. So just like normal people without a governing body. Hobbes thought that it was awful, that the state of nature is like the worst. So he thought that the best government is the one that has the smallest chance of falling into the state of nature. This is basically what he says in Leviathan when he published it in 1651. Hobbes argued that individual self-interest and unconstrained violence would really result in conflict between all people, that everyone would come together and fight. So everybody would always be in conflict. He thought that an all-powerful monarch was the best way to keep people from falling into the state of nature, because a dictator can establish peace and without any, dissent, right? The dictator doesn't have to talk to anybody else. They don't have to make sure that anybody else is on board with their plan. So they can just make a plan. People have to do it. It's going to keep them out of the state of nature. So people ask, like, what if this dictator sucks? What if he's a tyrant? And Hobbes was like, oh no, the state of nature is worse, like way worse. So anything that this dictator tyrant could do is better than the state of nature. So Hobbes really had a poor vision of humanity and what humans were like inherently. He thought that humans were inherently evil. And that is really driving this idea. Hobbes also warned against the church being part of the government. He thought that religion could become a source of civil war, and he was right. I mean, that's true. So he advised that the church become a department of the king's government so that the king could still, be in charge of the church. If there was a conflict between divine law, so like the Bible, and the king's law, Hobbes thought that the individual should obey the king or should die, literally. The second person we're going to talk about is John Locke. John Locke wrote the two treatises of government in 1689, and he was probably the most influential person in the American War for Independence and American Revolution. He came out with this idea of a social contract theory. He basically thought that political legitimacy, peace, and prosperity could really only be achieved if the people were cool with it. So the best way to do this, he thought, was to create a mutually agreed upon contract that grants power to a governing body like Congress or a president or parliament or whatever. He also said that this contract can be broken if people are dissatisfied with the governing body, if people are unhappy. So Locke doesn't think, this comes from the idea that Locke thinks that people are kind of malleable. He doesn't think that people are inherently evil, and he doesn't believe that the state of nature was really that bad. He thought that there were probably always families, always alliances, always social hierarchies, because he believed that people were inherently social. They're not good or bad, they're social, and through this socialization they can become good or bad. He believes that the purpose of government is to protect people, particularly their property and their rights. However, in order for this system to work, he believed that the populace had to be pretty well educated in general. Otherwise, people wouldn't know how to vote, and they wouldn't really know what to do. This became a real problem with the American Revolution, because they took this idea and they put it into our Constitution by saying that women can't vote and people who don't have property can't vote and slaves can't vote, and all of these people that can't vote because they're not well educated. So thanks, Locke. But Locke does devise the term system so that people can reassess how the president or how the Congress people are doing, so they can vote for someone else if they're not happy. He thinks that this is going to lead to fewer fights, physical fights. So Locke spoke out for freedom of thought, speech, and religion, but he basically believed that property was the most important natural right. He favored a representative government, such as like English Parliament or like American Congress, where the people elect representatives to represent us. Um, so he favored that kind of government, but he also favored the House of Lords and House of Commons. So he wanted some representatives to be well educated because their background is like of a lord, and the other people because they're elected by the normal people. So he wanted all representatives to be only men, and only men that had property, only men that did business. So this again leads to that idea that only adult male property owners can have the right to vote, and clearly this comes into the American Constitution. So Locke was pretty reluctant to allow propertyless people to participate in government because he basically thought that they were unfit to do so. So that's Locke. Montesquieu is our third thinker that we'll look at. He thinks that in the state of nature, individuals are afraid of violence, but like when they are alone, they're terrified of violence. But once they're in a society, once they're in a group, that sense of like weakness, that sense of fearfulness goes away, and then war starts. So we do need food. So coming together to form societies is like pretty like natural. We have to do it for protection and for, like I said, food. But people then started to war. It was in these wars that government came out of. So government keeps us from warring and killing each other when we don't really have to. So he believes that the purpose of government is to maintain a law and order, also to keep people's liberties intact, and to allow private property, just like Locke. He believed in the separation of powers, just like Locke, with the monarchy, the aristocracy, and the commons. He also believed, interestingly, that climate influences the nature of men. So that's like colder people are going to, like people who live in colder environments are going to have a different nature than people who live in warm environments. So that was kind of odd. He also believed that women could lead in government, but could not lead a family, which is sort of a break from Locke, but also kind of the same. Montesquieu also supported slavery. The fourth and final thinker we'll talk about is Rousseau. So Hobbes and Locke basically think that government makes us better, it makes us happier, but Rousseau really questions this. Rousseau believes that people are inherently good. This is such a break from the ideas of Hobbes. People are not evil, they're not malleable either. They are inherently good, they are inherently unselfish, and they desire love more than anything else. He believes that people are basically corrupted by societies, they are corrupted by governments. So once people come together and decide to make this sort of hierarchy of government, people start to hate each other, and this causes war. Rousseau believes that in the state of nature, people ran to each other. They were scared. Like Montesquieu, he believed that people were scared. They ran to each other and joined together, and that this was a good thing before creating institutions in societies. He believes that people that once lived in utopias then moved into societies, and this caused the declaration of mine. See quotes. This ownership, right? To say that is my thing. This quest for ownership really drives every negative impulse that people have, including war. So Rousseau believes in a complete break from Locke and Montesquieu that private property and greed are the root of all evil. He believes that the only thing that's important is the love of another human being. He's such a hippie. He's so cute. But basically, he thought that the best government would be small communities, small enough to create a direct democracy. They wouldn't have private property. Everything would be communal. So people would just like share their land and like share their stuff, and people would vote directly. Like they wouldn't have representatives in government voting for them. They could vote themselves. He believed that religion divided and weakened the state. He said, quote, "It is impossible to live in peace with people that you think are going to hell." He's not wrong. I mean, that's kind of legit. He also thought that the powerful and rich like were stealing the land that belonged to everybody, and he basically thought that like these powerful rich people sort of like hoodwinked common people into accepting them as rulers. So they gave up their rights to these, people for no real reason. He called all the people the sovereign, basically saying that the people are the king. The people are in charge. People then should exercise their general will to make laws for the common good. So the sovereign makes laws for the common good, just like Hobbes, except that sovereign for Hobbes means king and sovereign for Rousseau means people. So Rousseau is pretty straightforward. People should run government. It really should just be a direct democracy. People should vote on laws directly. And then all problems will be gone. Rousseau's general idea later was embodied in the words "we the people" at the beginning of the US Constitution. He's a very influential thinker. So, here are some thought questions. First, with which philosopher do you most agree and why? Second, what's important in a society and what's important in life? And third, what do you believe about the inherent nature of humans? Are we good? Are we bad? Are we malleable? Are we nothing? Are good and bad, constructs? What do you think? Think over these thoughts, answer them in the questions below, and feel free to send me an email if you have questions, but we will talk about this more in class. Thank you.